Was the Twab too long? You didn't want to read it? I got you. First, we start off with a Destiny Assassin's Creed crossover. That'll bring us some cosmetics. Then we move on to loot that is leaving and coming. Some things to note with 2 new weapons coming to Trials of Osiris, Wendigo returning to Nightfalls, and 2 technically new Iron Banner weapons. This is the ritual weapon for next season. The full auto retrofit mod is becoming a setting, like they promised, I think, a year ago. Shotgun spread is getting a complete rework. As you see here, each frame will have a set pattern. Here are some small adjustments coming to shotguns with that. Here they say that they reduced the zoom stat on Drang. Next, they go into fusion rifles, and specifically main ingredient. They slightly nerf its stability and aim assist to keep it within range. They also add that fusion rifle hipfire reticles are changing to reflect accuracy. Glaives are getting some slight adjustments, starting with the projectile has been adjusted to be more reliable with hit detection. The melee attack now procs with Syntheseps, Wormgod Crest, and Winter's Guile. The melee damage multipliers are reduced against champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles, and the base damage is reduced from 75 to 67. Next, they show how Rose's stats are going to get slightly adjusted. Bungie lets us know that weapons using the old blinding effect are now being switched to the new blind effect. Weapon mods like Dragonfly Spec, Rampage Spec, and Surrounded Spec are now being folded into the base perk. Here we have some perk adjustments. Encore is getting changed to make it easier to use. Headseeker is also being changed to become easier to use. Air Assault is also getting reworked to actually be a good AE perk. Seraph Round's range is being nerfed. They are making it so Tunnel Vision and Kill Clip are refreshable while the perk is active. But with this change, they are reducing the kill clip damage bonus from 33 to 25%. The Deepstone Crypt perk Redirection will no longer consume its damage buff on red bars. Hake Breach armaments will now have increased damage on Ward of Dawn and Well of Radiance. Gutshot Straight is getting a buff on auto rifles. Compulsive Reloader now works down to half the magazine. The High Impact Frame Intrinsic perk will now allow a small amount of movement. Unstoppable Force is getting a nerf from 30% damage to 20% extra damage. Ambitious Assassin now has 7 seconds between kills rather than 5, and Well-Rounded's duration is increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Recombination should now work in PvP, and it grants up to 100% bonus damage in PvE, or 50% in PvP. Zen Moment now will no longer deactivate on 1 missed shot, but now has a 1-second timer. Some quick changes coming to Divinity. Rewind rounds now actually works when shooting the Divinity bubble, and the Cloud Strike Storm will now activate when hitting the Divinity bubble. Genesis works in PvP. 1 Quiet Moment procs faster after a kill, and Gun and Run now procs on half the number of kills. Now we move on to a few nerfs. Box Breathing is getting a nerf on scout rifles, presumably to stop the 3-tap, and 1-2 Punch is getting nerfed across the board, mainly so you can't one-shot bosses. They then show us a long list of changes coming to some enhanced perks. Most of them are inconsequential with a change of a +5 stat, but I would look at Enhanced Explosive Light, which now has 1 more charge with a cap of 7. The Fundamentals perk, which can be found on Borealis, Hard Light, and Dead Messenger, is getting a buff depending on which element you're on. And Borealis is just getting a buff in general, where now Breaking a Mass Shield gives you 5 rounds of increased damage, and is not deactivated by reloading. Jade Rabbit is getting a redesign, where now quickly landing 3 crits returns a round to the magazine and increases the damage of your next body shot, and it stacks up to 3 increased damage body shots. It will reset if you reload. Here Bungie shows us a graph of the top 20 exotics used in raids, and here comes some nerfs to the outliers, with the Wither Horde shot that is on the ground being reduced from 7.5 seconds to 4.5 seconds. Divinity is getting the 15% nerf, and Arbalest now does less body shot damage. They also are nerfing Gallarhorn just a little bit. The actual impact damage of the rocket will now do 25% less damage, but Wolfpack rounds are unaffected. Here they show us another graph of the top 20 special exotic weapons in PvP, and some nerfs coming from that is just Forerunner getting its base damage decreased from 40 to 37, and crit damage decreased from 72 to 67. And the final graph they're showing us is the lowest 20 exotics used. They also add, with the addition of the full auto setting, exotics with the full auto perk are having it replaced, such as No Time to Explain with Frenzy, Traveler's Chosen with Surplus, and Vigilance Wing with Ensemble. Dead Man's Tale is getting a slight consistency adjustment. So now that if you are in hip fire and you aim at the head and the body, it will prioritize the head. And body shot damage is increased from 46 to 54, but reduced crit damage from 81 to 80. Some more exotic adjustments are Darcy will now jolt enemies that are affected by Personal Assistant. Wishender will deal more damage to targets affected by Wither Horde. And Whisper the Worm will now have its airborne effectiveness increased to 80. Continuing on, Prospector now has Chain Reaction, and the Fourth Horseman has 50% less recoil. Forerunner is also getting buffed pretty heavily in PvE. It's having its crit damage increased by 30%, the grenade damage increased by 60%, it's reducing the ammo cost of the grenade, and it is increasing the damage at the outer edge of the grenade from 0 to 20%. Merciless is getting buffed, so now that there's a 5-second timer holding the increased charge rate. Rat King is now having its perk activation radius increased by 5 meters. Legend of Acrius will no longer slow you down while using it, and Bastion's spread angle has been reduced by 6%. A change come in Quicksilver Storm, and a slight buff. Its grenade damage will now do 120 rather than 80 in PvP, and its rockets are being fixed to no longer do arc damage. Cold Heart now produces more Ionic Traces, maxes out its stability and reload stat when at max damage, and picking up an Ionic Trace will now reduce the time it takes to get to max damage. Grand Overture is getting a large buff, with its missile damage increased by 50%. Xenophage is getting a change and a very small buff. Now it does half of its damage as impact damage and the rest as AoE detonation damage, and with this change it is having its damage increased by just 5%. Some armor changes, starting with Wormgod's Caress and Winter's Guile, having their max damage multiplier reduced from 7.5 times to 3.5 times. And Gyrfalcon's Hauberk will be essentially reworked with 6.3.0.1, having volatile rounds when exiting invisibility rather than the damage buff, and executing a finisher while invisible will give you the damage buff. Also, in that update, players that are invisible will have their radar range reduced to 24 meters from 64 meters. Here they tell us what we can look forward to in the future, starting with a heavy weapon damage rebalance, a rebalance of the airborne effectiveness stat, and adding subclass 3.0 verbs to exotic weapons. They say there are 7 currently. They then tell us what mods we can look forward to on the artifact next season, with hand cannon, scout rifles, bows, post rifles, auto rifles, and submachine guns, and the return of Unstoppable Grenade Launcher. There is a vote that will be happening on December 5th for an Arbalest exotic, and remember, these materials will be going away next season, so use them while you got them. Known issues, take a look at that, and of course, if you are on Stadia, make sure to save your character so you don't lose everything. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, I hope to see you around.